So I don't know about you, Nick, but I think that this is probably the mark. This is a very serious, when we get to 120 feet, this is a very serious distance. There's a lot of good technique that's got to come together for this. I'm talking 120 feet with a 5-weight, no wind. Okay, that to me is a mark, and it's always been the mark for me, and it's kind of still the mark. I mean, I've been in the finals and the worlds twice or three times, I think, certainly twice with casts of less than 120 feet. So that's the top eight. So anything over 120 feet is a seriously good distance cast. I can remember my first one, and I think in the first year I probably threw three of them. That's how long it took me. And the second year they started to become. And I think when we talk about this, it's important to realize. I mean, we do in competition, we have 2 minutes, so we have like 6, 7, maybe probably 7 casts in those 2 minutes. And for me, I would hope to get one or preferably two casts in that 120 foot. If I wanted a really consistent score, I wouldn't try to throw 120, because if I'm trying to really push it to 120, there might be some catastrophes, because you're really pushing it to the edge, aren't you? More likely to get tailing loops. If you go to the World Championships, you'll see loads of tailing loops, because the difference between an open loop and a tailing loop is it's that straight line, and we really push it either way. And all the tip just has to dip a little bit and come up, and in the power application, you've got a tail. So we see them a lot in the worlds, right? In competitions. So what we're going to talk about in this is we're going to talk about the 170 as a casting technique, and it's basically what I consider it to be is two back-to-back stopless delivery casts. And by that I mean we have this stopless delivery back cast, just like you were really going to let it go to a target, and we'll talk about the method of doing that, followed by a stopless delivery on the forward cast. And stopless it's really transformed flycasting, I think, the way we think about it, because instead of trying to match the casting arc to the bend and the rod, we're just going all the way over, and we finish with the rod pointing at the target, just like you were throwing a ball. You wouldn't try and stop the hand before you let it go. It's just letting it all go to the target.
Well, Paul, I do agree with that. Actually, it's a completely different feeling, isn't it, that we're going to talk about with the 170 or the stopless cast. We're not trying to create a tight loop, but we're just coming through. And to me, the feeling is like throwing the widest possible loop behind me for the back cast, and almost like a rubbish open loop is the feeling. So I'm not trying to stop it like in the open stance distance that we did from the 110 to 115. I don't know how it feels to you, Paul, but I know you've talked about a frisbee, and it feels like throwing a vertical frisbee behind you. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, the name stopless, a lot of people, the term stopless came really because it feels that's what we're doing, and that's where this term originated from. So it's basically a contrast. It's a contrast between what we were doing before and what we're doing now. So it's a feeling. It's a different feeling. I normally see, we've gone through this series as distance caster, but I would normally introduce the stopless element of a forward cast quite early on in my teaching, because it's a good way of generating high line speed and avoiding collisions with the line and the rod tip. And the key is, so long as we have the back cast trajectory right, like 180 degrees from the front target, which means elevated if our target's down there, we can actually finish with the rod tip touching the water, and everything rolls out, and it will roll out from the rod tip to the fly. So, and we can utilize this. If I come back to you a little bit, we can utilize this instead of trying to throw this tight loop by stopping the rod here quite high and throwing a tight loop. All we're going to do is we're going to accelerate with the rod tip all the way down to the ground. And it will, and the loop will still be tight, and it will come down to the target so long as the target's in the right place. And so this is the cast, because you can generate much higher line speed. This is the casting. This is the cast I use anyway for casting into the wind. Instead of trying to get a tight loop to go into the wind, we just set the targets up and we just power through it and finish with the rod tip pointing at the target. And if the loop opens, when I'm teaching this, if the loop opens, it's one of two reasons. It's either the back cast is too low, which causes the loop then, you know, the line, this line then to come up and open, or the power is being applied too early. So if your power is being applied from here as you're coming, that's just going to throw an open loop. But if the power is applied from the perpendicular over to the target, the rod butt perpendicular, even later to the target, then the loop's always going to, then the fly leg is going to be straight, angled at the target. Okay. So let's go into the back cast, because this is the same thing. Okay, and let me show you a drill that I use, Nick, for teaching people this back cast.
Okay.
So starting, this is the way I do it originally, because because it's so foreign for us to get the hand into this position. If you try teaching somebody stopless, they always sort of go here and they try to poke the rod up, but we want them to finish here. So the easiest way I find to teach it is to have them start here. And so turn the reel up, turn the rod up, so the back of the hand is underneath, and the rod butt is touching in against the forearm. And start with a shortish length of line, like 6 feet. And just like with that pick up and lay down drill, I'm going to pick up the line with the rod tip. And as soon as I get the line off the water, then I'm going to make this, my back cast target bell is up here. I'm going to ring that bell, and then I'm going to put it straight back down. So the movement is from this elbow. And I can look through the rod at the target. Okay, so lift up and finish pointing at the target or at the water. And then repeat and add a few more feet of line. So up to about 20 feet here. So the movement is rod up here. This will feel a bit awkward at first. I'm going to come up here, elbow, back down. So we're trying to imprint this movement at the end of the stroke. Now, as you get more line up there, out to about 40 feet, you're going to have to come through past the body. You're going to need a longer stroke length. So I'm going to angle my back a little bit. My target's still up there, rod up. I'm going to come up past the body, but the important thing is I'm going to come to about here. I'm not going to turn this into a forward cast, because then I'm going to get these big loops. So I've still got my target up here, come up to the body, and then finish here with a straight arm. Now, I would then develop this into a longer distance cast, gradually building it up, putting targets at 50, 60, 70 feet. Okay. And I teach to have this open stance position as if we're going to cast that way. So my right foot is pointing at you, my left foot is pointing in the opposite direction to my back cast target, in other words. So I'm going to come up here, weights on the back foot, bang. But the bit that we really want to imprint, when we come, we want to get to this position before we apply the force. We want to get up to here. There, that's where the force is. To build on that a little bit further, because I talked about putting those targets at 50, 60, 70 feet, I'm going to introduce a haul. We're really jumping ahead here because you need to train this bit first. But to introduce a haul here, you've got a haul opposite the hand. So on my back target, the haul comes down to my right foot. And on my front when I'm making the back cast, my haul comes across like a karate chop away from the rod. Okay, so I'll do that again. I'll just back cast delivery in here. I'll just do a force cast so you can see it. And this haul here, I think is the most effective haul you'll ever get. Okay, so the other way of looking at that is Just this crazy man like this, with the whole upper arms and the shoulders straight, and we're going to tilt that down to the target. But I'm going to take this right arm and my weights like this. My right arm is at 90 degrees here, vertical, and my left arm is at 90 degrees, horizontal. And I'm going to get into that position, and then I'm going to go bang. That's the bit that we need to imprint. And that's a bit that's very foreign. We're used to doing that or whatever we're doing. We need to get over to that position and whack. Okay. All right. There you go. That's what I teach, but that's probably 2 lessons in there. Okay. But that's how I build the backcast.
Yeah, cheers, Paul. I really like that exercise, particularly when you did the crazy man, which is a which is a very good way of looking at it. I love it because it's a completely different feeling to what we're usually doing. With open stance distance, we're blocking the forearm and flicking the wrist, but with the 170, we're not trying to form a tight loop as such in the conventional way. We're just getting our elbow, as Paul says, to that position. I can't really see the screen because the sun's in my face. That position, and then we just straighten the forearm for the back cast. So to me, it feels like I'm throwing a really wide, fat loop behind me. I'm not trying to stop and make a tight loop or use thrust or jab. I'm just letting that rod just come straight over, and I'll try and cut in some footage of the Echo MPR, which I did in my garden, of this actual loop, which you can see. So I'll cut some in there so you'll be able to see it. So yeah, as you can see on the video, I'm not trying to stop the forearm and flick the wrist. I'm just letting that rod go right over. And as you can see in the video, it's pretty much ending straight down. Now that's quite an exaggeration from what we are actually doing, because it is called the 170 or 170 or even 180 degrees. So the end of the back cast is going to end up something like that, with the rod pointing straight back. So I have different shooting heads made up of 5-weight lines, because we're really talking about competition distance. So SA MED 5, if you want to get into the World Championships, that's really the line. That's got a 60, what did we say, Paul? Is it a 68.5-foot head or something? It's something around 70 feet, isn't it?
For what? The med?
Yeah, for the med.
5 is 68, I think.
Yeah, so that's,
and then they get progressively longer as they go up in weight.
So that's a very, very long head. If you're just coming from normal fishing lines. So what we really need to do is to get our carry up to a certain point where the 170 will work. So did you want to talk a little bit, Paul, about overhang? Because I know we discussed it a little bit, and I said to add about 20 foot onto the back of the head for this to work. But maybe you could explain why we need to use overhang.
Well, firstly, I mean, the separate elements work in a way. Like a stopless back cast always works, and a stopless forward cast always works, no matter how long the head, right? But when you add them together, then you're taking your rod tip through a big wide arc, and in order for this to work, there has to be sufficient line left that's left straight. So even though we might have pulled 10 or more feet of line away from the loop, we've left, it could maybe 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 feet of line that's got is aimed in our right trajectory to our target. And that's effectively how it works. So we've accelerated through that point where this rest of this line wants to travel to. And we've just got the rod tip, because I think it was you who said we get to, instead of trying to stop at that position, we're just accelerating through it, and the remainder of the line travels. But to become competitive in this, what you want to leave, you want to have the head, at the end of the head, at the very top of the loop, and you want running line inside the loop and inside the rod tip, which is why you need to go like whatever it is, 78 feet plus maybe 5 or 6 feet of fly line in the initial part of the loop down to maximum counterflex, plus 9 feet to the rod, plus your haul. So it works out in the region of 90 feet. That's a huge carry. But you don't need 90 feet of carry to make the 170 work. But you do need probably about 70 feet of carry. Put it that way, I would say. Otherwise, see when you've got to that level of overhang, the loops suddenly morph differently. But the cast will still work even if the loops are not morphing. You can still, like, for example, if you had a 100-foot double taper, you would still be doing the 170 to get to your max to get to your longest carry, right?
Definitely, Paul. Yes. So I think, Paul, it'll be worth going probably through some exercises for this, because I learnt the 170. Well, certainly the feeling of the 170 with an exercise from James. So what James does from the BFCC is he goes through a lot of MEDs. He does, and rather than just throw them away, he cuts them into shooting heads. So I have one here. This is an old Barrio line. It's not a MED. And what I've done is I've cut this at 60 feet. So this head is 60 foot long. I've also put some mono behind. And if I just pull some more line off, there's going to be a little bit of electrical tape on a certain point. I don't know if you can see that, Paul.
Yeah.
I'll bring it a bit closer. So there's a little bit of electrical tape on the mono shooting line. And you might be thinking, what's that for? Well, that's a good question, because I've said it's about 20 feet on the back of the head. So the head's 60 feet long. So I've put that flag on 80 feet, which to me gives me a very good delivery. I've done it the same with the Ballistic Pro Performance, which is a 58-foot head. And that goes best on about a 78-foot carry. And the overhang really depends on a lot of factors, like the rod stiffness, as Paul says, which is related to rod counterflex, how long your haul is, what technique you use. So if you use open stance distance, it's a short stroke, so you're not pulling as much line away from the target as you would with a 170, where you're just going straight through. So to get the feeling of this, it's probably worth getting a cheap double taper 5, because we are talking about 5-weight distance. And then, well, you can actually get a few. So I've got a 55-foot head, which is my starting training one. I've got a 60-foot, 65, 70, and that's the I think I've got a 75 as well, but that's quite a beast. So you can pretty much track and train your progress. So the longer head that you use, you'll get a lot better. But to start off with, it might be worth cutting a double taper to, I don't know, say 50 feet, and then put a little flag on 70. Good little tip as well, because the electrical tape, it can slip. So I'll measure the line against the tape measure, and I'll put the electrical tape on, well, if it's a 50-foot head, it'll be 70, around that, depending on the factors I've just mentioned. I'll put the electrical tape on 70, and then I'll tie a knot in the line so that it doesn't slip. So I'll just show you what that's like. So 60 foot, you can't start with the 170, so it's going to be compact open stance distance. And the aim is to get the head outside the rod tip. So what I'm going to do, give me enough line to haul. I'm going to slip this line out. Start with the open stance distance technique first. Get the head out. There we go. And what you want is to have thin mono, I'll just stand back a bit, thin mono shooting line. You don't want any weight in that whatsoever. because you want that loop to morph, and you'll see it. You'll see the mono shooting line almost hit the ground and then bounce back up, and that's what we're looking for. So maybe, Paul, we can probably cut in some footage of you. I think the best one I saw from for the loops is when you were standing, was it on a tree log or something? It was something big, wasn't it, in the water?
Yeah, floating down the lake. I don't
From
know.
memory.
It was there for about a week and then it disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. I never found it again.
Wow.
Oh,
Big tree, that was.
40, 50 feet long. Don't know where it come from. Don't know where it went. So yeah, that's great. And so look, so I got a couple of other things that I use at that point too while learning it, because some people it's really quite difficult to learn this when you first try to incorporate this, and you're trying to learn this stopless backcast. There is a loss of feeling of tension in the vertical plane. So I've found that it's a lot easier for people when they initially learn it is to learn it on the side, or not quite at 90 degrees over, but more at about like 70 degrees over. And that way you actually feel the tension in that. So remember, the key point is to get this rod butt under the forearm, and so you're leading with the back of the hand, like a backhand tennis swing, right? And you can just train. It's much easier to learn this off to the side. And then once you've got it off to the side, it's gradually start to bring it up to the vertical. And at some point, you're going to have to arch your back to bring this completely to the vertical. Okay, so I find that's probably the best way, sideways and bring it up. A couple of cues here. So you've got your front target. We talked about how to pick the front target, put the rod down, pointing at it, and then you go around the rod and you see where your back target is. Remember, your shoulder is always in the middle of that. So this rod has to come through where the shoulder is. That's really important. As soon as it comes out to the side, you've got a big problem with the rod tip curving on and not tracking straight. So you've got to come through. And I find it much easier to come up and over with the elbow, because to bring the elbow over the shoulder is much easier than to try to bring it in through. So this come up over here and get to that position, then flop. Just as Nick was saying, it's really a flop of the forearm. It's not powered. Gets to that position there, block. I liken this to this, I like this idea of transferring kinetic energy up through the body. Like on the open stance distance, we've blocked our forearm and flipped our wrist. Here we're blocking our upper body, and then we're just flailing the forearm. That's how I see it. So it should feel relaxed. Okay.
That's a good description, Paul. Actually, it is a flail, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, that's
like
what John Ward said, and I think it's just a great term. So there's another drill as well, which I found very useful, is to intentionally dome the loop. Big windscreen wipers. I tried to show that last time, and then we were in the boat, and it wasn't possible. So I intentionally to learn to do this stroke. Where a lot of people go wrong is they try to poke the rod to the target. And the best way to do it is to just really open up, like this big windscreen wiper washer cast. Big loops, like 40 feet wide loops. And then gradually straighten up. So yeah, big exaggerated casts. That gets you doming the rod tip, because it is a domed rod tip. The guys who are learning this have spent so much time trying to throw a straight rod tip path instead of just letting everything happen, that it prevents them from learning the 170. I'll do it again. and then gradually straighten up. Yeah.
For 120 feet, that is a competition distance cast, isn't it? Especially with a 5-weight. So perhaps, did you want to explain that how we actually compete in competition, like the what length you pick up from, because we can't go straight into the 170, can we? We have to use this.
And I see guys actually in competition trying to do this, and it's a mistake, because then they spend the next 3 or 4 false casts trying to get it back under control. So it's much better off to get that first back cast under control, which may even mean shortening up, but it's fine. I always go in the third. I always go in the third cast. I've got one back cast. I use pullback for the first one. You know, open stance distance, pick up, bang, tight loop. With a soft rod like this is a 6-weight rod, I'm going to go straight into the 170. With something like the HT10, which I use in competition most of the time, my next cast will be pullback. And then my third cast will be stopless. But with this, I go stopless and it's straight into the second one. So the first one is you know, pullback. The second one is stopless.
Nice.
Go. So I always go in the third. All right. Do a couple more. Something I would like to show though is false casting, because there's 2 parts to this stroke. I see it in distance training. We've got 2 parts to it. One is we work on how much line we can carry and working on the false casting, and the other component is to work on the launch. It's about being relaxed. Hey, look, something else we could probably talk about here is this cradle grip that we use. So it's actually, I think Rick came up with this. Dan McCrimmon, he named it, and it's kind of stuck. And it's a way of delaying the rotation on the forward cast, is because instead of this grip here is to hold the rod in the curvature of the fingers. You can see that there. And so it's not into the heel of the hand, it's in the curvature of the fingers. And the rod is supported between the thumb and the first finger, and it's turned around. It's in the curvature, but it's turned around the third finger. So it's so the wrist is in this plane, but this is the move. The rod is here, curvature of the fingers, and as you get to the end of the stroke, then it's almost like clicking the third finger. It's almost clicking your finger at the end of the stroke. That to me is that to me is one of the keys that certainly adds distance to me. I can do a couple of casts here, and there is a shift. The rod is under the forearm on the back cast, and then we have to shift the plane of our wrist, because we've gone from this flexion extension on the back cast, but I now turn the wrist into this plane in order that I can rotate around the third finger.
The best description you gave to me on the forward cast was like dunking a basketball. So we're not trying to apply the force straight to the target. We are going around with the rod, aren't we? We're going straight over.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably important to talk about the contact with the forearm, because on the back cast we do have that rod butt tucked under the forearm, and you can tell if you've done it right, because like especially after the UK Championships, I had a massive bruise on my forearm from the rod butt, which signifies that you are rotating really late at the end of the back cast. But on the forward cast, it's a little bit different. As Paul said, it's got the cradle grip, but it's important that when we come forward and we finish the cast, I don't know if you can see, it's probably, let me go this way. It's important that this rod butt doesn't contact the underside of your forearm. So it shouldn't end up like this. It should end up round the side. Maybe you want to tell people, Paul, why that's an important thing.
That just stop. If it hits the forearm, it just bounces. It shocks the rod, and you get it down the bottom, the rod leg of the loop. I think the other point is when we apply. So I call it a hit. It's like when we spike the force, and on the back cast, I want to get that rod butt to the vertical or even later before I hit it. So this is gradual. I sit there, bang, okay, or then I fly out, right? But that is when the speed goes, and that's when I hit the hole. On the forward, I come through once again. I talked about it earlier. I actually look for the third section of the rod coming through, because if I to see the third section of the rod, I'm going to be about here. So the rod's passing the perpendicular again, and that's when I hit it around. You know, the power application is around, right? It's like drawing a sword down, but it's drawing the sword from here around, and we get the sword to there. So my cues when I'm doing this, I got two targets. So I look at my back target. Just get a line up here. So I look at my back target. I then look for the rod. So I see the rod there. When that rod's hit the vertical, perpendicular, that's when I apply the force, and the same on the forward. So target, rod, target, rod, target, hit. Okay, and it's probably the most common fault, and it's one we all have this trouble, and you'll see it all the time in the world, is hitting it too early. I think that amongst really good casters, that is the thing that happens every once in a while. And so just hitting it later, it's a timing issue. And if you hit it too early, sometimes the loop will tail. It can also be an open loop. All sorts of things can go wrong. So it's that late hit. It's hard to hit it too late, actually. And that's when you begin the haul. So that's there. That gives you an idea of the timing.
But you do make a good point about rods, Paul. So I've got what I tend to use mostly is this fairly softish 6-weight rod, as you can see with the tennis racket over grip. And you'll see a lot of people using tennis racket over grip. I know I don't think Paul uses it. I think he does occasionally, but it might be worth mentioning that, because as Paul says, even I'm sure both of us, when you hit it too late, you get, oh, hit that way too early. Well, what the overgrip does and helps you is to help to leave rotation towards the end, and it gives you a nice relaxed grip of the rod, so you're not so if you've got a strong grip on the rod, almost like a death grip, you'll tend to rotate through the stroke, which is what we've discussed in our previous videos. But if you've got this overgrip, you can hold that very gently, and to me that helps with force application as well. So you can be really precise because you're holding the rod so gently that you can feel exactly where you're putting the force in.
Tailwind and headwind.
That's a good one.
It is a good one. And particularly on the last one, because we did one before and people were surprised. So
yes, about letting the back cast drop.
Yeah, I don't think
general advice, which is
you lose tension. You want to keep that tension. So if you need a low back cast, fire it into a low back cast. Exactly. And if you've got and that kind of leads us to the situation when you do need a low back cast, which is when you've got a tailwind. Okay. Yes. So if you've got a tailwind, the first back cast has to be a Belgian cast, a side back cast, because you can't go from low to low over the top of over the top of your shoulder. So the first one needs to be on the side, and then straighten everything up. So then you're on the vertical, and then you've got your aeroplane wings for your targets. Back cast is low, forward cast is up. So that's really important, and that's how most of it's set up, isn't it? In competition, mostly nowadays they set it up with that. It didn't used to be like that, but it certainly is like that now in many circumstances. Not if you go to a game fair or something like that, because they're on a platform, and whichever way the wind's going, they can't move anything around because they've got it set up. If it's in a field, it can be different. If you're on a platform in a competition, you may not get that. You can get crosswinds, and you can theoretically you can even get a headwind, although that's kind of unlikely in the world. I certainly cast in competitions with a headwind. I've cast in 2 in Montana, and I won them both. They all set it up into the wind, so it didn't favor right or left-handed, and didn't get the hero win. So it was always a headwind, which suited me fine because I could carry more than everybody else, and I just had to get that to unroll. And so it was pretty damn windy too. And the same thing there. Once again, you've got those airplane wings, but your forward cast is aiming to the ground, so it doesn't blow back, and your back cast must be up. So you just elevate your back cast target. So you just look at a different target. So I don't know. So like on my back cast target, I normally look at about the horizon. That's where I'm aiming. Okay. And that's where I'm. In fact, that's not where the rod tip is going, but that's where I'm aiming, and it will be domed slightly. It will come in a trajectory, and it will come to that point. But I'm looking where I want. I'm looking to my target. Forward cast target. I'm looking 15 degrees up in no wind or if a tailwind. Always 15 degrees up. If I had a shorter head, I would aim higher, but I don't. I need to. So it's a 15-degree incline. That's my target. I throw up over the top of it into a headwind. My target's on the ground. Okay, so or targets on the ground at 110 feet or something like that, or just above that. So I'm aiming low. Back cast must be, but then I'll stick my back cast higher. The other thing I do, Nick, I don't know about you, is in order to get my trajectories on the forward cast, I will pick a point, and I will gradually increase the height of that point. So
that's what I do.
now know it's 15, but I'll gradually go higher and higher. And at some point, the loop will tail, and then I'll lower it again. That's something you want to do before you do your 2 minutes casting competition. If you can, that's something you want to be playing with. But I think that's the way I've learned it is getting that point where it doesn't tail. It's such a fine line between having the optimal straight line power application and getting a tail. So I actually think the borderline is not having an open loop. The borderline is a tail and playing around with what doesn't tail. And in order to do that, you have to play around with what does tail. So it's about timing of power application, how you apply it, when you apply it, angle, so trajectory, so on. So that's how I see it in a way.
Pullback is what we term really is reverse torque. So, and I do like Paul's description. It is like whipping a towel, or it's like twanging a plastic ruler, a fly swat as well behind you when it goes like that. That's the feeling you're after. So there's really three types of stops that we use. So we have this what we usually term, which is the squeeze stop, which is this squeeze stop, which gives you a nice loop backwards and forwards. Then we have something called pullback. So I'll do a normal stop on the forward cast, and then I'll use pullback. So this is your normal stop, and then pullback is this movement here where you come back with your hands. So it's a doink. So you're doiking. To me, it feels like I'm doiking the rod, and I think this is a Mal Krieger exercise, isn't it, Paul? Where you can really feel it if you take a rod without a line and just do a normal squeeze stop, and then for pullback, it's not a double movement. It's replacing the hard stop at the conclusion of the cast. So it's this bang, and you can tell you're doing it right because you can feel the rod tip bouncing and almost pulling your hand back a tiny little bit. But we don't want to use pullback on our delivery. I use it on my back cast to give me a nice tight loop, nice tight fast loop. And the reason you don't want to use it on the forward cast is because it accelerates turnover, and we don't want to do that when we're casting distance. We want to delay turnover and keep that loop shape for as long as possible. So I'll just let me move over a little bit. There we go. Don't know if you can see, Paul. I'm reflecting on the phone a little bit. So, and we'll talk a little bit about the pickups as well, but I usually aim to have my fly on about 75 feet, which is about there. So my first back cast, look at the target, pull back. There we go. So that pullback allows me to get that loop under control. As I say, we can't go straight into the 170 because then you'll be chasing slack with a short amount of line. So that's what I use pullback, Paul. I don't know if you agree with that or if you want to add
yeah,
anything.
I use it. Yeah, same reason. Set up a tight loop on the back cast, and usually the subsequent forward cast as well. It's a good question about delivering. I know people used to do. There are some people. I mean, the guy actually came up with the term. He did use it as the delivery cast, but we all thought he was wrong, and I think we still think he was. I still think he was wrong. But there is another one you can use. You can use torque twist. So there is actually 4 stops that I use. So I've got pullback, stopless, hard stop, and then torque twist. And I have tried to incorporate that into my distance, but with not great success. But I certainly
forgot about that one. It's hard to keep your hands straight, isn't it, with torque twist?
It's very difficult to get it perfectly straight, and it's just any deviation in the rod tip path as you come through, particularly a little deviation like that, causes all sorts of problems. So it's easier just to go stopless and flop it.
Look at the target, pull back, 120, 170, sorry. There we go. That's 120. In fact, that's a little bit over on there. So yeah.
Yeah. All right, man.
Brilliant. Take it easy, mate. Avoid some lightning and thunderstorms.
Yeah, well, I'll try. Take care, man.
Brilliant. Cheers, mate. Day. Take it easy. And you.
All right, mate. All right, cheers, dude.
Another splendid exit.